You climb the last few wooden rungs of the ladder, feeling the slight give of the old, soot-darkened wood under your hands. One hand after another, you pull yourself up until your head is level with the edge of the roof, and you look out at the slates spreading before you in the dimness. You step off the ladder and place one bare foot onto the nearest slate. The surface is cool and somewhat gritty, carrying the fine residue of coal smoke that has settled there over many days. The roof pitches at a gentle angle, not too steep, and you find a place between two broad chimney stacks where the slope feels secure, a small valley of tiles where you can rest. You lower yourself carefully, feeling the slates press against your clothing, the worn fabric of your trousers catching on a rough edge here and there. With your back against the bricks of the chimney stack, you settle into a position that allows your weight to be evenly supported. The bricks still hold a faint warmth from the fires of the previous day, a subtle heat that seeps through your jacket and into the muscles of your back, contrasting with the cool air that brushes your face and hands. Above you, the sky is a muted darkness, not black, but a deep charcoal grey, and a few stars remain visible, scattered in no particular pattern. You look up at them without needing to name any constellation, simply noting their steady light, how they seem to shimmer faintly whenever you hold your gaze steady. The moon is not visible tonight, or perhaps it has already set, leaving only the vast quiet of the pre-dawn hour. The air is still, so still that you can hear the faintest rustle of your own breathing, the slight shift of fabric when you adjust a shoulder. Looking out from your perch, your eyes travel across the jumbled shapes of London spread before you in shadow. Rooftops extend in all directions, an uneven sea of angles and ridges, some covered in dark slates, others in tiles that in this light appear as nothing more than layered blackness. Chimney pots rise like a forest of silent sentinels, some squat and wide, others tall and narrow, many topped with little cowls or pots that have broken edges. A few have faint wisps of smoke already, thin grey threads that curl upward and disappear against the sky. The streets are invisible, sunken in deep shadow between the buildings, but here and there a tiny orange dot of an oil lamp flickers. These dots are few and far between, marking the corners of streets or the gates of coaching inns. The great dome of St. Lyme, Paul's Cathedral, is a massive rounded silhouette on the horizon, darker than the sky, but not by much, a shape you can just make out if you know where to look. The River Thames is not directly visible from this spot, but you sense its presence to the south, by the way the city seems to open out into a faint, misty greyness, a slightly lighter band that might be water reflecting the unseen sky. The quiet of this hour is deep and layered. There is the outer silence of the sleeping city and the inner silence of your own body slowly unwinding. You listen to the sounds that do not happen. No carts, no voices, no church bells. The only sound you can detect is a very distant, almost imagined hum that might be the river moving or the blood in your ears. The cold air touches the skin of your face, the tips of your ears, the bridge of your nose, a gentle cold that grounds you in the present moment without causing any discomfort. Your eyelids feel heavy, but you keep them half open, gazing across the rooftops with a soft focus, not straining to identify anything in particular. The feeling of the rough chimney bricks against your back remains, that stored warmth, a quiet comfort. Your hands rest on your knees, the knuckles slightly chilled, the fingertips tracing the coarse texture of your trousers absent-mindedly. You have no particular task to perform, no errand to run. This is a time of simple waiting, of simply being. The roof has become your temporary refuge, a place withdrawn from the busyness that will come later. Your breathing has found a slow rhythm now, each breath a little deeper than the last, and your shoulders have dropped away from your ears, releasing a tension you had not been aware of holding. The cool slates beneath your legs have begun to share their chill through the fabric, but the warmth of the chimney bricks balances it, creating a sensation of contrast that keeps you alert and drowsy at once. The sole of one foot rests against a raised edge of a tile, a small ridge that you can feel even through the calloused skin, a tiny point of pressure that is constant and unremarkable. You notice the weight of your own head, the way it balances on your neck, and you allow it to tilt back slightly so that your gaze rests on the sky once more. As time drifts, the stars begin to fade, one by one, not dramatically but very gradually, their light thinning as the sky lightens by imperceptible degrees. The darkness softens into a deep slate blue, and the rooftop shapes gain the faintest edge of definition. You can now see the individual slates on the roof opposite, the small ridges and overlaps that were before just a single mass. A chimney pot that you had taken for a solid tube reveals itself to have a crack running down its side, a dark line that you follow with your eyes, not out of curiosity, but simply because it is there, a detail in the growing light. The air remains still, and the smoke from the few active chimneys rises in straight columns, barely bending, as if painted onto the sky. You turn your head slowly to the left, where the city slopes down toward the river. There in the far distance, the sky has taken on a faint yellowish tint, the very first hint of dawn bleeding through the coal smoke haze. It is not a bright color, just a slight warming of the grey. Below, in the alleys and courtyards that you cannot see directly, you imagine the heavy stillness, the cobblestones damp with dew, the shop front shuttered tight. A cat might be padding home, but you neither see nor hear it. The only movement in your vision is the slow, almost hypnotic undulation of a thread of smoke from a chimney to your right, a pale grey ribbon that twists and untwists, never the same shape twice. You follow its path upward until it merges with the sky, and then you find another wisp, and another, each one a small study in soft motion within a world of stillness. You become aware of the smell of the air, a faint bitterness of coal tar mixed with the clean, damp scent of night, a combination that you know well. It settles in your nostrils without being unpleasant, just another element of the rooftop world. When you lick your lips, you taste the faintest residue of soot, a dry, earthy taste that you do not mind. Your hands, when you examine them in the dim light, are stained with dark smudges, the ingrained soot that never quite washes out from under your fingernails or from the creases of your knuckles. These hands have climbed many flues, and the soot is a part of them, just as it is part of the slates, and the bricks and the air itself. The roof you sit on is part of a tall house, 4 stories high, with a garret window just below you, that is still curtained and dark. The chimney stack behind you serves several fireplaces, and you can feel a very slight vibration through the bricks whenever a puff of smoke is released inside, a low, almost inaudible thrum that is more felt than heard. The lead flashing that seals the junction between roof and wall is dull and grey, catching a little of the nascent light. Some of the slates are cracked, and a few have slipped, leaving small gaps where birds might nest. In fact, you notice a pigeon roosting on the ridge of a dormer window a few houses away, its head tucked under a wing, a small grey lump that you might have missed entirely had you not looked directly at it. The quiet is so complete that when a church bell finally tolls somewhere in the distance, the sound comes to you as a soft, low note that hangs in the air for a long moment before it decays. It is a quarter-hour bell, perhaps from St. Mary le Bow, or another of the many Rhine churches whose spires dot the city. You count the strobes absently, not needing to know the exact hour, just letting the sound wash over you. After the bell fades, the silence returns, deeper than before. Then, after a long interval, another bell from a different direction, a slightly higher pitch, and the 2 notes seem to overlap in memory, a gentle counterpoint that never resolves. With each passing minute, you feel your body become heavier, melding into the roof as if you were part of the building itself. The bricks at your back might as well be an extension of your spine, and the slates under your legs an extension of your floor. Your thoughts, which might have been lively earlier, have now slowed to a quiet trickle, each one drifting across your mind and then disappearing, like the thin threads of smoke. You do not try to hold on to any particular thought. You just let them come and go. The sensation is not unlike the edge of sleep, that floating place where awareness of the outside world blurs into a soft, comfortable fog, yet you remain awake, knowing that you can simply be here for as long as you wish. There is no obligation to move, no immediate demand on your time. The sky continues to brighten, now showing layers of grey and pale blue, with a streak of light orange low on the eastern horizon. The chimney pots on the far roofs now have distinct shapes, and the smoke rising from them has taken on a warmer hue, as if tinged with amber. The pigeon on the ridge stirs, lifts its head, and then settles again, rearranging its feathers with a soft flutter that you can almost hear. A few more oil lamps have been extinguished. The small orange dots blink out one by one, leaving the streets entirely dark again until the daylight can reach them. The air temperature has dropped just a little more, that pre-dawn chill, and you pull your jacket a bit tighter, crossing your arms loosely over your chest. The wool of the jacket is coarse and threadbare in places, but it holds the warmth of your body, and the slight change in posture makes you aware of the ache in your shoulders from the previous day's work. An ache that is now a dull, distant throb. Nothing urgent, merely a sign of muscles that have labored and are now at rest. The slates around you are coated in a fine black grit, the accumulation of months of coal burning. When you run a finger over the surface, it comes away with a dark smudge. You rub the soot between your thumb and forefinger, feeling its dry, powdery texture, then wipe it on your trousers. The rooftops themselves are a patchwork of different ages and repairs. Some slates are dark and old, others lighter, recently replaced. A copper flashing on a nearby dormer has turned green with age, and you notice how the light now catches it. A faint gleam of verdigris against the sooty backdrop. Your attention drifts back to the chimney smoke, which now rises in greater volume as more fires are lit below. The columns are thicker, and they lean slightly as a gentle breeze has begun to stir from the east. You watch the shifting shapes, the way one plume curls back on itself before stretching out into a thin veil. The smell of coal grows a little stronger, mixing with a new scent of baking bread that drifts up from somewhere unseen. All of these sensations layer upon each other without demanding anything from you. The cold stone under you, the warm bricks behind you, the dark sooty air, the pale sky, and the quiet rumble of a city slowly stirring. You remain still, your breathing steady, your gaze soft, holding on to the quiet as the world turns toward morning. There is no need to move, no place to be except this patch of roof between two chimneys, where you rest and watch and breathe. The sky above you has begun its slow turning, a gradual shift that happens without any sudden change, as if a great wheel is rotating overhead at a speed too gentle to perceive. When you first settled against the chimney bricks, the heavens were a deep charcoal grey, studded with the last few stars of the night. But now that darkness has lifted by the smallest degrees, replaced by a softer tone that spreads from the eastern edge of the world. You watch this transformation with eyes that blink slowly, your gaze resting on the far horizon where the rooftops meet the sky. There is a band of colour there now, a pale greyish blue that holds a hint of something warmer underneath, like milk diluted in water, and above it, the deeper slate of the retreating night still lingers. The stars that were so steady earlier have faded one by one, not vanishing all at once, but dimming as if withdrawing behind a thin curtain. You can no longer find the bright one that hung above the river, nor the faint cluster that sat near the chimney of the tall house to your left. In their place, the expanse of the sky appears smoother, more uniform, a vast dome of quiet colour that seems to press down lightly on the sleeping city. The quality of the light at this hour is peculiar, a sort of filtered grey that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It is not the sharp light of full morning, but a diffused glow that softens every edge and blends every outline into a hazy continuity. You notice how the chimney pots no longer appear as stark black silhouettes, but have taken on shades of dark brown and muted red, the bricks revealing their true colours for the first time since you climbed up here. The soot that clings to the pots and cowls still darkens them, but now you can see the texture of the mortar between the bricks, the small irregularities where a mason's trowel had smoothed the surface long ago. The slates on the roof opposite have shifted from a uniform black into a patchwork of dark grey and faint purple, each tile catching the nascent light at a slightly different angle. Some glint dully where a trace of moisture still clings to the surface, tiny beads of dew that have not yet evaporated. The lead flashing that seals the valleys between roof sections has turned a pale, lustreless silver, like the skin of a fish, and you follow its path with your eyes as it zigzags down toward the gutter, where a tuft of moss hangs in a dark green clump. High above, where the sky is still darkest, a few thin clouds have become visible, streaks of vapour that were invisible in the deeper night. They stretch across the dome from north to south, long and narrow, their edges feathered and soft. As you watch, the eastern end of these clouds begins to catch a faint warmth, a suggestion of rose that is barely there, more a feeling of colour than actual colour. The clouds move very slowly, or perhaps they do not move at all. It is hard to tell because the shift is so gradual that you lose track of any reference point whenever you look away to rest your eyes on the rooftops below. When you look back up, the clouds seem to have drifted a little to the west, their eastern tips now a touch more golden than before. The rose tint spreads along the length of the cloud like a slow blush, and then it fades as the light changes again, shifting from rose to a pale apricot, and then to a yellowish cream. You let your eyes follow one particular cloud from its leading edge to its trailing tail, a journey that takes several long breaths, and by the time you reach the end, the entire formation has altered its shape, pulling apart into two thinner strands that drift separately. The smoke from the chimneys adds its own layer to the lower sky, a brownish-grey haze that sits just above the rooftops, and where the smoke meets the clouds, the two mingle in a soft blur. The sun itself is still hidden below the horizon, somewhere beyond the dome of St. Paul's and the distant hills to the east, but its presence is felt in the way the light continues to grow and in the way the shadows on the western sides of the chimney stacks have begun to soften and shorten. You shift your weight slightly, and the movement makes you aware of the cold air that has settled on the outer layers of your clothing. The jacket you wear is thick enough to hold in your body's warmth, but its outer surface has grown chilly to the touch, and the fabric feels stiff where the dampness of the night has seeped into the fibers. The air itself has a particular smell at this moment, a blend of cold stone and coal smoke and the faint, clean scent of the dew that still lies on the rooftops. Inhaling slowly, you taste the crispness of the morning, the way the cold air seems to sharpen the edges of every scent. There is no wind to speak of. The air moves only in the gentlest of currents, a drift so light that the smoke columns rise nearly straight up, bending only at their very tops where they catch a higher breeze. The stillness of the air makes the sky seem all the more immense, and you feel very small beneath it, a tiny figure perched on a rooftop in the middle of a vast, quiet city. This feeling is not lonely, but peaceful, a recognition of your own smallness that somehow brings comfort rather than unease. The slowly turning sky is so much larger than you, so much older, so indifferent to the small rhythms of human life, and yet it includes you in its quiet vastness without any demand or expectation. You are simply here, watching, and that is enough. The blue of the sky deepens as the minutes pass, shifting now from the pale grey blue of early dawn into a clearer, cleaner tone. It is still not the bright blue of midday. It carries a milky quality, a softness that speaks of moisture in the air and the lingering haze of the city's smoke. Far to the east, just above the line of rooftops that marks the edge of your view, the sky has taken on a buttery yellow hue, and the clouds that hover there are rimmed with gold. This golden light spills over the furthest chimney pots and the distant spire of a church, gilding them with a warm glow that stands in gentle contrast to the cooler tones of the sky above. The spire's weather vane catches the light and flashes once, a brief spark of gold, and then the light moves on, leaving it dark again. You notice how the color of the sky is not uniform, but graded in subtle bands, the yellow near the horizon, then a band of pale greenish-gray, then the wide expanse of milky blue, and finally, overhead, the last vestiges of the night's indigo, retreating westward like a tide pulling away from the shore. These bands are not sharply defined, but blend into each other over a span of many degrees, so that if you try to mark exactly where one color ends and the next begins, you cannot. The transition is continuous, a seamless gradient that shifts even as you watch, the whole dome of the sky in motion but at a pace so slow that your eyes cannot track it. Birds begin to appear now, small dark shapes that flit across the sky in quick, darting movements. They are sparrows or perhaps starlings, their forms too small to identify with certainty from this distance. One lands on the ridge of a nearby roof and sits there for a moment, its head turning left and right before it flies off again, disappearing into the grey haze that still obscures the streets. Another bird circles higher, caught in the golden light of the rising sun, its wings flashing pale against the blue-grey of the upper sky. You follow its flight without moving your head, just your eyes, watching it spiral upward in lazy circles until it becomes a mere speck, and you lose it among the drifting clouds and the smoke. The presence of the birds marks a shift in the morning, a sign that the day is advancing, but you feel no urgency to match their activity. Their quick movements and sudden flights belong to a different rhythm than the one you inhabit, a faster tempo that does not pull at you. You remain still, your weight settled into the slates, your breathing slow and even. The sky continues to turn above you, and you continue to watch it, letting each subtle change wash over you without holding on to any one moment. The western sky still holds the darkness of the retreating night, and you turn your head to look at it, noting how the color there is a deep, muted violet, almost gray. The moon is not visible, having set before you climbed up here, but the memory of its light seems to linger in the way the western clouds have a faint, silvery edge, the last trace of reflected moonlight before the sun's dominion is complete. These western clouds are thicker than the eastern ones, piled in soft mounds like unwashed wool, their bases a flat gray and their tops catching the first indirect light from the east. They move very slowly, their shapes changing from rounded domes to elongated drifts over the course of many minutes. Watching the western sky is like looking into the past, seeing the last remnants of the night while the morning grows stronger behind you. This duality of light, the warm gold to your left and the cool violet to your right, creates a sense of balance, of standing at the hinge between night and day. The chimney stack at your back is at the center of this transition. Its left side now catches the golden dawn light, the brickwork warming to a ruddy orange, while its right side remains in deep shadow, the mortar lines still black and the soot stains invisible against the darkness. As the dawn progresses, the light begins to reach the rooftops around you directly. You see the first true ray of sunlight strike the top of a tall chimney pot. 3 houses over, a brilliant spot of orange gold that seems to glow from within. The spot spreads downward as the sun climbs, illuminating the pot's entire rim and then the upper courses of brick, until the whole chimney stands in sunlight, its shadow falling across the slates in a long, sharp triangle. Nearby chimneys follow, one after another, their tops catching fire in sequence as the sun's angle changes. You watch this slow parade of illumination, noting how the light creeps from east to west, claiming each chimney in turn, and you wait for the moment when the sun will reach your own rooftop. The slates in the sunlight look entirely different from those still in shadow. The lit ones are a warm grey-brown, their soot coating appearing almost golden, while the shadowed ones remain a cold blue-grey. The dividing line between light and shadow moves very slowly across the roof opposite, advancing slate by slate, and you can see the precise moment when a ridge tile catches the sun and the moss growing on it turns from black to vivid green. Everything the light touches seems to soften and warm, while everything in shadow remains cool and still, and you observe this transformation with a quiet attention that asks nothing but to notice, to be present. The sky now is all blue and gold, the indigo entirely gone, the stars only a memory. Small puffy clouds have formed in the east, their undersides still grey, but their tops brilliant white, and they drift northward in a slow procession. The smoke from the chimneys has become thicker and more numerous. Dozens of columns rising from all around you, some straight and tall, others bent and ragged, all of them glowing where the sunlight passes through. The layers of smoke and cloud and clear sky create a complex texture overhead, a weave of grey and white and gold and blue that changes its pattern from moment to moment. You let your eyes rest on this shifting tapestry, not trying to follow any single thread, but letting the whole composition fill your vision. Your breathing has become so slow and regular that you barely notice it, and your body has settled into the slates as if you were a part of the roof itself. The turning of the sky continues, and you continue with it, unhurried and at peace. Your gaze, which has been resting on the slowly brightening sky, now lowers by degrees until it meets the uneven line where the rooftops begin. The city spreads below you in a vast, rumpled patchwork that extends in every direction, a quilt of roofs stitched together by the streets that remain hidden in shadow. At this hour, the light has grown strong enough to reveal the true character of each surface, yet it is still soft enough to blur the harshest edges, lending the entire scene a muted, almost painterly quality. The first thing you notice is the sheer variety of colors, a subdued palette of reds and grays and browns and blacks, each tone bleeding into the next across the unbroken expanse. Some roofs are covered in tiles of a deep, earthy red, the clay having faded over decades to a rusty terracotta that reminds you of dried autumn leaves. Others are clad in dark slates that absorb the light rather than reflect it. Their surfaces are matte charcoal that glistens only where the morning dew has not yet burned away. Between these two extremes, every intermediate shade makes an appearance. Roofs of purplish grey, roofs of reddish brown, roofs of bluish black, and roofs where lichen and moss have introduced patches of muted green and mustard yellow. Your eyes travel slowly from left to right, following the contours of the nearest buildings. The house directly opposite, a tall structure of 4 stories with attic dormers, wears a roof of dark slate, each tile slightly irregular in shape, laid in overlapping courses that create a pattern of horizontal lines broken by the occasional crooked edge. The slates near the ridge are clean and smooth, but lower down, where the pitch meets the gutter, they are stained with broad streaks of black soot that have run down from the chimney pots whenever rain carried the grime with it. These stains spread in fan shapes, dark fingers reaching toward the eaves, some ending in a dribble that has dried to a crusty film. At the very edge of the gutter, a tuft of moss hangs in a thick, cushiony clump, its color a vivid olive where the dampness persists, and a browner, crisper shade where the morning air has already begun to dry it. The dormer window that projects from the roof slope is framed in unpainted wood that is weathered to a silvery grey, and its small panes of glass reflect the pale sky in a series of dim, wavering squares. The window is still dark, its curtains drawn, and the little lead roof above it sags slightly in the middle, worn by years of rain and the weight of occasional snow. Beyond this house, the rooftops drop to a lower level, where a row of shops with living quarters above them presents a different kind of covering. These roofs are tiled in the old style, with curved pantiles that overlap like the scales of a fish. Their surfaces blazed once long ago, but now dulled to a soft, powdery orange. Moss grows freely here, filling the grooves between the tiles and spreading outward in rounded cushions that look soft enough to touch. A single chimney stack rises from this roof, taller than any around it, its bricks laid in a decorative pattern of projecting courses near the top. The stack leans very slightly to the left, a deviation so small that you might not have noticed it if you had not been looking so steadily. Where the chimney meets the tiles, a thick collar of lead flashing has been fitted, and the lead has turned a pale, chalky grey over time, marked with thin cracks that trace their way down the brickwork like veins. On the far side of this roof, a wooden platform has been built, a sort of walkway for the sweep or the roofer, and the planks are dark with moisture and speckled with bird droppings. As your gaze stretches further, the roofs become a steady, rolling sea of angles and peaks, dormers and gables, chimneys of every imaginable size and shape. There are squat chimneys wide enough to contain 4 flues, their tops capped with simple flat stones, and there are narrow chimneys that rise like pencils, topped with conical cowls of rusted iron. Some chimneys are square, others rectangular, a few octagonal, where wealthier owners once paid for ornament. They jut upward at various heights, none quite matching its neighbor, so that the skyline resembles a comb with broken teeth. The space between these chimneys is filled with the ridges of roofs, some running straight and true from gable to gable, others broken by a change in height or direction where an extension was added or a fire once forced to rebuild. The ridge tiles themselves are often different from the rest, a darker clay or a more carefully shaped slate, and they sit on the peak like a row of small, rounded hats. Where the veins appear here and there, their iron silhouettes turning slowly in the light breeze, a cockerel, an arrow, a ship, a simple banner. They squeak faintly when the wind catches them, a sound that is too far away for you to hear but that you can easily imagine, a tiny, rusty note in the morning air. The lead valleys where 2 roof slopes meet at an inward angle form a network of silvery grey lines that trace through the patchwork like old scars. They catch the light differently from the slates and tiles, gleaming with a dull, metallic sheen that seems almost liquid. In some of these valleys, debris has collected, a scattering of dead leaves that blew up from the streets in some autumn past, a small twig carried by a bird, a fragment of broken slate that has slid down from above. The leaves are dark and wet, plastered flat against the lead, their veins still faintly visible as raised lines. Where 2 valleys converge near a chimney stack, a small pool of water has gathered, left over from yesterday's drizzle, and its surface is so still that it reflects a perfect upside-down image of the brickwork above, a mirror of muted red and grey. The dormer windows that punctuate the roof slopes come in many styles. Some are flat-roofed with a simple pediment. Others have little gables of their own, miniature roofs that echo the larger one they sit upon. Their windows are mostly dark, but here and there a faint glow of candlelight or a newly lit lamp flickers behind the glass, proof that someone has risen early to begin the day's work. The surrounding timber frames of these dormers are painted in various faded colors, a pale green here, a dusty blue there, all peeling in the damp London air. You notice, as your eyes wander without hurry, that the roofs are not entirely a domain of tiles and lead and timber. There are signs of other life scattered across their surfaces. A pigeon has landed on the ridge of a nearby roof, its grey body blending with the slates so perfectly that you only spotted it because it moved. It stands there, balanced on the peak, its pinkish feet gripping the ridge tile, and it looks around with quick, jerky turns of its head. After a moment, it fluffs its feathers, puffing out its chest until it seems to double in size, and then it settles again, tucking its head down and drawing one leg up into the warmth of its belly. The damp air has darkened the tips of its feathers, giving it a speckled, almost marbled appearance. A second pigeon lands nearby, dropping out of the sky with a clatter of wings, and the first bird shifts slightly to make room, the two of them now sitting side by side on the ridge, like small feathered ornaments. On a different roof, further away, a flock of sparrows flits about the base of a chimney, chirping in short, sharp notes that carry faintly across the space. They bathe in a shallow puddle that has collected in a dip in the lead, fluttering their wings and sending up tiny droplets of water that catch the light and vanish. One sparrow hops onto the rim of a chimney pot, perches there for a heartbeat, and then dives into the dark opening within, disappearing from sight. You wonder if it has a nest inside, a small, warm pocket of twigs and feathers wedged somewhere in the flue, but you do not ponder it deeply. You simply note the disappearance and move on. The boundaries between the roofs, where one property ends and the next begins, are often marked by parapet walls or by the slight step in height that occurs when houses were built at different times. These walls are of brick, the same London stock that forms the chimneys, and they are capped with stone coping that has weathered to a rough, pitted texture. Some of the coping stones are missing, leaving gaps through which the slates of the neighbouring roof can be glimpsed, and ivy grows in these gaps, its dark leaves spilling over the brickwork in heavy curtains that sway with the brickwork in heavy curtains that sway with the breeze. The ivy clings to the walls with tiny, hairy tendrils, and where it has grown thickly, it forms a dense mat that looks almost impenetrable. In the spring, these ivy patches are bright green, but now they are a darker, bluish green, tinged with brown around the edges where the cold has bitten. Here and there a bare branch protrudes from the ivy, the remains of some climbing rose or wisteria that long ago tangled itself with the ivy and now stands dormant, waiting for warmer weather. The soot stains that mark the roofs are as much a part of the landscape as the tiles themselves. Every chimney pot is surrounded by a dark halo of grime, and from these halos, black streaks fan out across the slates like the rays of some dark star. You trace the path of one such streak with your eyes, a long smear that begins at the base of a towering chimney and runs all the way to the gutter, its edges feathering out into a grey haze. Where the streak crosses a patch of lichen, the lichen has withered and turned black, unable to survive the constant deposit of acidic soot. In some places the soot is so thick that it forms a crust, a brittle layer that cracks and peels when the sun warms it, and you can see the lighter slate beneath where a flake has recently fallen away. The rain shapes these soot deposits too, washing some areas clean while leaving others untouched, creating a patchiness that is both messy and beautiful, a record of the weather and the wind and the thousands of fires that have burned below. A little to your right, the roofscape is interrupted by a large flat area surrounded by a low brick parapet, what must be the roof of a warehouse or a manufactory. This flat roof is covered in gravel, a different surface entirely from the pitched tiles and slates around it, and its monotony is broken only by a few skylights, their glass panes clouded with soot and cobwebs. A wooden ladder has been left leaning against the parapet, its rungs dark with age, and a coil of rope lies on the gravel, one end tied to an iron ring that is set into the bricks. The flat roof seems to serve as a catchment for stray objects, a broken crate, a tangle of discarded sacking, a single wooden bucket that has fallen on its side. These objects sit in a quiet, forgotten stillness, untouched by any hand for a long while. From this flat space, you can see the back of a large sign that faces the street, its painted letters hidden from you, only the blank weathered boards of the reverse showing. The boards are nailed to a heavy wooden frame, and the frame is propped up by several struts, their shadows stretching across the gravel in long, thin lines. The river, though not directly visible from your rooftop, makes its presence known in the quality of the light over the southern rooftops. There is a slight shimmer in the air above that quarter of the city, a lightness that comes from the reflection off water, and the mist that rises from the Thames spreads a soft, silvery veil over the roofs nearest to it. The warehouses along the river have roofs of dark slate and timber, and many of them have cranes and hoists projecting from their upper stories, the ropes and pulleys hanging motionless. A few tall masts rise among the buildings, marking where ships are moored at the wharves, their rigging a faint web against the sky. You can just make out the tips of these masts, and you follow one from its base behind a high warehouse to its top, where a small flag or pennant hangs limp, too far away for its color to be known. Occasionally, a gull passes over the masts, its wings broad and pale, and its cry drifts to you as a thin, melancholy note that sounds once and then fades away. Returning your gaze to the nearer rooftops, you notice the many small details that make each one unique. A patched area where broken tiles were replaced with a slightly different color, leaving a noticeable rectangle. A ridge that has sunk slightly in the middle, giving the roof a gentle, sway-backed curve. A chimney that has been reduced in height and capped with a slab of stone, its former opening now bricked up. A dormer whose frame has warped, causing the glass to tilt at an odd angle. These irregularities are soothing to observe, because they speak of long years and gradual change, of a city that is never quite finished but always settling and mending and shifting. Nothing in the view before you is perfect, and nothing needs to be. The roofs have accommodated their flaws without complaint, just as you have accommodated the soot on your skin and the ache in your muscles. The world, at this moment, is entirely forgiving. The light continues to strengthen, and the shadows in the lead valleys grow sharper. The pigeons on the ridge shift their weight again, and one of them begins to preen, running its beak through the feathers of its wing in a slow, methodical rhythm. The movement is repetitive and calming, and you watch it for a long while, the bird's head dipping and rising, the feathers parting and falling back into place. The sparrows have quieted down, and the flock has dispersed, each bird finding a perch or disappearing into the ivy. The roofscape is now bathed in a warm, low-angled light that brings out every texture, every grain of soot, every ridge and every tile. It is a landscape of quiet endurance, a place that asks for nothing but simply exists, and you let your gaze drift across it without any sense of purpose, one rooftop at a time, one chimney after another, until the whole patchwork becomes a blur of soft, earth-toned tranquility. From your place between the chimney stacks, your eyes lift above the immediate jumble of slates and tiles to find the larger shapes that define the skyline of London, the great monuments that rise above the common rooftops like quiet sentinels keeping watch over the sleeping city. The most commanding of these, the one that draws your gaze and holds it, is the great dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, standing dark and calm to the southeast, its massive curve a perfect silhouette against the brightening sky. At this hour, the dome is not yet touched by the direct rays of the rising sun. It remains a study in greys, a soft charcoal bulk that seems almost to float above the surrounding buildings, its base hidden by the intervening rooftops so that only the upper portion is visible. The shape of it is so familiar that you might almost overlook it. But now, in the quiet of the dawn, you let yourself truly look at it, tracing its outline with a slow and unhurried attention. The dome rises in a smooth, uninterrupted sweep from the drum below, which you cannot see, curving upward and inward until it meets the lantern at the top, a small pillared structure that crowns the whole. The lantern itself is a delicate arrangement of columns and arches, and it is topped with a golden ball and cross that, even now in the dim light, catch a faint glimmer from the sun that is still below the horizon. This glimmer is like a single point of warmth in all the cool grey of the scene, a tiny beacon that seems to hold the promise of the full daylight to come. You let your gaze rest on the dome for a long while, noting how its appearance shifts subtly as the sky behind it grows lighter. At first it was a dark mass against a barely lighter sky, but now the contrast has softened, and the dome has taken on a bluish-grey tone, the color of slate that has been washed by rain. The ribs that run up its surface, faint vertical lines that divide the dome into sections, are now just visible. catching the side light in delicate threads of pale grey. You think about the thousands upon thousands of bricks and the tons of timber and lead that make up that great structure, the years of labor that went into its construction, and yet from here it seems almost weightless, a thing of air and shadow rather than of stone and wood. The dome is so large that it appears to belong to a different scale than the rooftops around it, as if it were a visitor from some other, grander city that has settled gently among the ordinary houses and shops. It presides over the morning with a calm authority that asks for nothing, demands no attention, but simply exists as it has for more than 70 years, a quiet witness to every dawn that has broken over London since the cathedral was completed. Around the dome at various distances, the spires of the city's many churches rise like slender fingers pointing toward the sky, each one distinct in its design and its silhouette. You pick them out, one by one, the closest first and then the more distant, letting your eyes jump from spire to spire, as if connecting dots on a vast, three-dimensional map. The nearest is a tall, tapering structure of white stone that glows faintly in the morning light, its surface worked with small openings and carved details that you cannot quite resolve from here, but that give the spire a textured, almost lacy appearance. The very top of this spire holds a weather vane shaped like a ship, its iron outline motionless now in the still air. Beyond it, slightly to the left, another spire rises, this one shorter and stouter, built of a darker stone that has aged to a warm brown, its corners marked by small pinnacles that jut outward like the knuckles of a hand. The clock face on this church is visible as a pale disk, and you can just make out the black lines of the hands, though they are too far away for you to read the time. The hands seem to point to some hour that does not matter, and you do not strain to decipher them. Further still, near the river where the mist hangs thickest, a group of 3 spires stands together, their forms softened and blurred by the haze so that they appear almost like drawings that have been smudged by a passing hand. The tallest of the 3 has a crown of delicate tracery at its peak, a sort of stone cage that looks impossibly fragile, as though a strong wind might shatter it, and yet it has stood for centuries, enduring every storm and every frost. The other 2 flank it like attendants, slightly lower, their tops simple pointed cones that lack the ornament of their companion. The haze that veils them shifts and thins as you watch, one moment revealing the sharp line of a pinnacle, the next moment obscuring it again in a drift of pale grey. This slow play of reveal and conceal gives the distant spires a dreamlike quality, as if they exist only intermittently, phasing in and out of the visible world with each breath of the wind. To the west, where the sky is still darker, the spire of Stintnight, Martin in the Fields, rises with a distinctive layered design, its successive stages of columns and arches diminishing as they climb, each one set back from the one below, so that the whole structure resembles a telescoping tower. The stone of this spire is a pale, almost creamy grey, and even in the shadow of the departing night, it holds a luminosity that the brick chimneys cannot match. The golden weathercock on top catches the first true ray of sunlight that has managed to clear the eastern buildings, and for a brief moment it flashes bright against the deep violet of the western sky, a single spark of gold in the darkness. You watch that spark until it fades, noting how the light seems to linger in your vision for a moment longer than it actually lasted. This spire, like all the others, is a landmark that guides the eye and orients the mind, a fixed point in the shifting mosaic of the city below. Between the dome and the spires, the rooftops roll in their uneven terrain, but your attention now is drawn to the other monumental forms that punctuate the skyline, the buildings that rise above their neighbours, not by virtue of a spire, but by their sheer mass and height. The Tower of London sits low and heavy in the east, its 4-cornered turrets and its central keep forming a blocky, formidable shape that speaks of age and solidity. The white stone of the White Tower is visible as a pale rectangle, and the surrounding walls and bastions show as long, dark lines that step down to the river's edge. Smoke from the chimneys of the tower's many fireplaces rises in thin columns, adding to the haze that already gathers around its walls. You cannot see the moat or the gatehouses, but you know them to be there, just as you know the river runs past on its southern side, hidden from you by the bulk of the warehouses on Lower Thames Street. Closer to your position, the monument to the Great Fire stands as a tall, slender column of pale stone, its fluted shaft rising from a base that you cannot see and topped with a golden urn that gleams dully. The column is so narrow and so straight that from this angle it appears almost like a needle, a single vertical stroke drawn against the jumbled horizontals of the roofs. It was built to commemorate a catastrophe and to celebrate the city's resilience, and it has stood for more than 100 years, a marker of memory that has long since become just another part of the landscape. You look at it without any particular feeling about its meaning, simply noting its presence as one notes the position of a tree in a field. The gold of the urn catches the same sunlight that touched the weathercock, and it glows with a steady, muted warmth, like an ember that has not yet faded to ash. The Guildhall, hidden somewhere in the tangle of streets to the north, makes itself known only by the top of its roof and the small lantern that sits upon it, a square structure with a cupola that is just visible above the intervening houses. The cupola is painted white, or perhaps the stone itself is pale, and it has the look of a small temple that has been lifted up and placed on the roof of the great hall below. Around it, the roofs of the city offices and livery halls crowd close. Their tiles are darker, duller red, their chimneys sending up thin wisps that mingle with the general haze. There is nothing grand about the Guildhall's visible portion. It is a modest presence, content to be glimpsed rather than admired, a quiet centre of governance that does not compete with the spires for attention. As the morning advances, the light begins to touch these great structures in a deliberate order, as if following a plan. The golden cross on St. Paul's is now fully illuminated, a small bright star that seems to float above the dome, and the lantern below it has taken on a warm, honey-coloured glow. The columns that ring the lantern are now individually visible, their shadows falling on the drum in a series of thin, dark stripes. The dome itself remains in shadow for a while longer, but the light is creeping down its eastern face, and you can see the line where the sun's rays meet the stone, a sharp diagonal that advances downward with each passing minute. The stone on the sunlit side is a pale, luminous grey, while the shadowed side remains a deep, cool blue-grey. And the contrast between the two makes the dome appear more solid, more three-dimensional than it did before. The ribs catch the light in bright lines, and the windows in the drum, which you can now see as small arched openings, glint with the reflection of the sky. The spires to the east are now bathed in full sunlight, their white stone almost too bright to look at directly, while the spires to the west are still cloaked in shadow, their forms receding into the dark remnants of the night. This division between light and dark moves slowly across the city, a wave of illumination that travels from east to west, bringing each spire into relief in its turn. You watch a particular spire that stands midway between the extremes, its eastern face now bright, its western face still dark, the two sides separated by a vertical line that runs straight down the center of the stonework. The pinnacles on the bright side cast long shadows on the dark side, and these shadows shift and shorten as the sun climbs higher. The whole process is like watching a sundial that measures not hours, but the slow turning of the earth, a silent cosmic rhythm made visible in stone and shadow. The bells of the churches have not yet rung for the morning service. The city is still in that quiet interval between darkness and the first call to prayer. But you know that soon the bells will begin, first one and then another, until the whole city is filled with their overlapping notes, a tapestry of sound that will hang over the rooftops and drift across the river. For now, the spires and the dome stand in silence, their bells hanging motionless in their frames, waiting for the hands of the clock or the pull of a rope to send them swinging. You can almost feel the potential energy stored in those bells, the weight of the metal and the tension of the ropes, but it is a potential that remains unspent, a quiet that holds itself in reserve for a little while longer. In this silence, the great monuments of the city seem even more like guardians, their stillness a form of watchfulness, their presence a steady reassurance that some things endure beyond the noise and hurry of the day. You let your eyes move slowly across the whole panorama once more, from the dome to the monument, from the nearest spire to the furthest, tracing the relationships between them, the gaps and the alignments, the way one spire frames another when you tilt your head just so. The city, seen from above, is not a chaos but a composition, its great buildings placed with a sense of order that reveals itself only from this height. The dome and the spires anchor the skyline, giving it a rhythm like the beats of a slow, solemn music, and the rooftops fill the spaces between with their quiet variety. The haze that hangs over everything unifies the scene, softening the distances and blending the colors into a muted, harmonious whole. There is no part of the view that demands attention more than any other. It is all equally present, equally calm, and you are content to let your gaze rest where it will, moving from landmark to landmark without any sense of hurry or purpose. The great dome and the distant spires simply are, and you simply see them, and that is enough. Below the jumbled rooftops and beyond the darker mass of warehouses that crowd the southern edge of the city, the River Thames reveals itself as a slender, winding ribbon of dull pewter, catching the pale dawn light in a way that is quiet and understated. From your high perch, the river is not a broad, dominating presence, but a sliver of water that appears and disappears between the gaps in the buildings, a glint of silver brown that traces a meandering path from the distant west toward the sea in the east. The morning mist, which still lingers in the low places, hovers over the water in a soft grey veil, and where the mist and the river meet, the boundary between water and air becomes uncertain, a gradual blending that makes the river seem to dissolve into the sky. The tide is coming in, a slow, deliberate movement that is almost imperceptible from this distance, yet you can sense it in the way the water seems to pause and swell, the current slackening as the sea pushes upstream against the natural flow. The surface of the Thames is not glassy, but has a textured, slightly rippled quality, like metal that has been brushed in one direction, and the color of it is a muted, silvery brown that shifts subtly as the light changes, sometimes taking on a hint of green where the water is deeper, sometimes a pale gold where the rising sun catches the ripples at just the right angle. Your eyes follow the course of the river as it snakes through the city, a line of light that divides the crowded northern bank from the more scattered buildings of Southwark on the opposite shore. The warehouses that line the river are tall, dark structures of brick and timber, their blank walls facing the water and their roofs crowded with cranes and hoists that stand motionless in the still air. Some of these warehouses have wide openings on their upper floors, great doors that hang open to receive goods lifted from the barges below, and from these openings you can see the faint glow of lanterns still burning inside, small points of orange that are just visible against the gloom of the interiors. The wharves and quays that front the river are too low to be seen from here, hidden behind the warehouses, but you can imagine the stone steps leading down to the water, the mooring posts slick with algae, and the wooden jetties that stretch out into the current. The river here is busy even at this early hour, though the activity is so distant that it seems to happen in a separate, quieter world. The boats and barges that sit on the water are tiny, dark shapes, some stationary and others drifting very slowly with the tide, their outlines softened by the mist. The lighters, which are flat-bottomed boats used for unloading cargo from the larger ships that cannot come this far upstream, lie close to the wharves, their decks piled high with bales and crates that form angular silhouettes against the pale water. Some of these lighters are empty, their decks swept clean, and they ride higher in the water, their hulls showing a band of dark, wet wood above the surface. A few have masts, though the sails have furled and the bare poles angle slightly aft, creating a sparse geometry of vertical and diagonal lines that punctuates the horizontal expanse of the river. The men who work these boats are not yet visible. Perhaps they are still ashore, or perhaps they sit quietly in the cabins, waiting for the day's work to begin. The only sign of life on the water is an occasional herry, a small rowing boat that moves with slow, steady strokes, its oars lifting and dipping with a rhythm that is too far away to hear. The ferry leaves a faint V-shaped wake behind it, a disturbance that spreads and fades until the river's surface is once again unbroken. You watch one such sherry as it angles across the current, the rower a tiny figure whose movements are economical and unhurried, the boat making its way from the north bank to the south with a purpose that you do not need to understand. Further downstream, where the river bends slightly to the east, the arches of London Bridge span the water in a long, low series of grey humps. The bridge is old and heavy, its piers thick with the accumulated weight of centuries, and the water rushes between them in a way that you cannot see but can easily imagine, a swift, churning current that makes the passage dangerous for boats. The arches are of different sizes, some wider to accommodate the deeper channels, others narrower where the riverbed rises, and this irregular rhythm gives the bridge a character that is unlike any other structure in the city. The stone of the bridge is a dark, weathered grey, streaked with damp and stained by the smoke of countless chimneys, and the houses and shops that sit upon it form a continuous line of rooftops and gables that seems almost like a street that has been lifted into the air. From this distance, the buildings on the bridge are a uniform grey-brown, their windows mere specks, and the chimneys that rise above them send up thin threads of smoke that mingle with the mist over the water. You can just make out the central arch, which is wider than the others. It spans a darker gap in the stonework, where the water flows freely beneath. The bridge marks the limit of your vision downstream. Beyond it, the river continues its journey toward the Pool of London and eventually to the sea, but those reaches are hidden by the curve of the land and the thickening haze. Turning your gaze upstream, to the west, the river becomes a narrower and more winding ribbon, its course marked by a line of lighter sky where the mist reflects the dawn. The bends of the Thames are gentle and sweeping, and they carry the eye past the distant spires of Westminster, which are just visible as tiny hazy shapes, and on toward the countryside beyond. The water upstream is calmer, less crowded with boats, and its surface has a smoother, more reflective quality, catching the pale gold of the eastern sky and holding it in a long, shimmering band. Along the banks, the buildings give way to gardens and orchards that slope down to the water's edge, their bare winter trees forming a delicate tracery of dark branches against the mist. In the spring, these trees will be green, and the gardens will be bright with flowers. But now they are dormant and still, their colors muted to browns and grays that blend with the earth and the river. A few cows stand in a water meadow on the south bank, their shapes small and dark, and they move with the slow, grazing pace of animals that have no concept of time or urgency. The scene is so peaceful, so removed from the bustle of the city that lies just behind you, that it seems almost like a painting, a landscape composed for quiet contemplation. The quality of the light on the river is constantly changing as the sun climbs higher, and you notice how the water, which was a dull silver-brown a few minutes ago, is now taking on warmer tones, the ripples catching the golden light and turning to a shimmering bronze. Where the mist is thinning, patches of clear water reflect the blue of the sky, and these patches grow larger as the sun burns off the last of the night's moisture. The shadows of the boats and barges, which were soft and grey earlier, have now sharpened, and they fall across the water in dark, elongated shapes that shift and tremble with the movement of the surface. A barge that had been stationary begins to move, its crew having come on deck, and you watch as it is pulled slowly away from the wharf, the long pole dipping into the water and pushing against the riverbed with a motion that is repeated again and again, each push moving the barge a little further into the current. The barge turns as it catches the flow, its bow swinging downstream, and then it drifts with the tide, a slow, majestic progress that requires no further effort from the men on board. They stand at the stern, one with a long oar that he uses to steer, and their voices, if they speak, do not carry to you. The barge becomes smaller and smaller as it moves toward the bridge, and eventually it passes under one of the arches and disappears from view, continuing its journey to some destination that you will never know. The river is not silent, even from this height. If you listen carefully, you can hear the faint sounds that rise from the water, the low, steady lapping of the tide against the stone quays, the distant cry of a gull, the creak of a boat's timbers as it rocks gently at its mooring. These sounds are so soft that they barely register, blending into the background hum of the waking city, but they are there, a quiet music that underscores the visual calm of the scene. The gulls are more numerous now, their white bodies wheeling above the river in slow, lazy circles, and their calls come to you as thin, melancholy notes that rise and fall with the breeze. Some of the gulls land on the water, settling with a small splash, and they sit there, bobbing on the ripples, their heads turning to watch for scraps of food that might float by. They are patient birds, content to wait, and their stillness adds to the sense of timelessness that the river always carries. The Thames has been flowing past this city for longer than anyone can remember, and it will continue to flow long after every building you see has crumbled away. This thought is not a sad one, but a comforting one, a reminder that the world is larger and older than any single moment or any single life. The banks of the river are lined with a curious mixture of the grand and the humble. Here and there, a nobleman's mansion faces the water, its stone facade pale and its windows tall, with a private stair leading down to a dock where a gilded barge might be moored. These houses have gardens that run down to the river, their terraces and lawns now dormant and brown, and the statues that ornament the balustrades stand wrapped in morning shadow, their features softened by distance. Next to such a mansion, there might be a cluster of timber-framed tenements, their upper stories jutting out over the water on rickety supports, the windows crowded with washing lines and bird cages. The contrast between wealth and poverty, which might seem stark at street level, is softened by the unifying haze, and from this distance all the buildings appear as part of the same quiet tapestry, their differences muted and their shared silence more important than any division. The river belongs to everyone and to no one, and it flows past the mansion and the tenement with the same unhurried grace. The tide continues to rise, and you notice that some of the mud flats on the south bank, which were visible as dark brown smears a while ago, have now disappeared under the advancing water. The river is fuller, its surface higher against the wharves, and the current has slowed almost to a standstill as the incoming tide reaches its peak. At this moment of slack water, the Thames seems to be holding its breath, the ripples barely moving, the reflections becoming so still that the bridge and the buildings on its far side are mirrored almost perfectly on the surface, a ghostly city hanging upside down in the water. The mirror image trembles slightly with each passing boat, but it reforms quickly, as if the river is determined to preserve this fragile double of the world above. You watch the reflection of the bridge, noting how the arches become perfect circles when joined with their mirrored counterparts, and how the houses on the bridge seem to stretch downward into a shadowy underworld of inverted gables and chimneys. It is a fleeting beauty, this reflection, because even as you watch, the tide begins to turn, and the first faint ripples of the ebb disturb the glassy surface, breaking the image into 1,000 shimmering fragments. The sky above the river has now taken on a clear, pale blue, the mist having retreated to the far horizons, and the sun, which has fully cleared the rooftops, casts a warm golden light over the entire scene. The water is no longer pewter, but a bright, silvery blue where it reflects the sky, and the shadows on its surface are deeper and sharper. The warehouses on the north bank, which were a uniform grey earlier, now reveal their individual colours, the warm red of brick, the dark brown of timber, the pale ochre of plaster. The cranes and hoists stand out as dark silhouettes against the brightening sky, and you can see the ropes and pulleys in fine detail, the hemp fibres catching the light. A few more boats have appeared on the water, their sails now unfurled and catching the light breeze that has sprung up with the sun. The sails are white and tan and faded red, and they billow gently, pushing the boats slowly upstream against the outgoing tide. The movement of these boats is so gradual that you can only perceive it by looking away for a while and then looking back, noting that a boat has shifted its position relative to a fixed point on the shore. This slow progression is restful to watch, a reminder that not all movement needs to be hurried, that some journeys take their own time. The river bends again just beyond the bridge, curving southward toward the great sweep of the Isle of Dogs, and there the water broadens, becoming a wide expanse of silver that merges with the distant sky. The ships that are moored in the deeper channels that are larger than the barges and wherries, their masts a forest of bare poles that sway very slightly with the swell, and their hulls are dark and solid against the shimmering water. Some of these ships are merchantmen, newly arrived from distant ports with cargoes of tea and silk and spice, while others are colliers, their holds filled with coal from Newcastle that will soon be carried up the river to feed the city's insatiable fires. The flags that fly from their sterns hang limp in the light air, their colours indistinguishable at this range, small patches of red or blue or white that add a final delicate touch to the maritime scene. You let your gaze rest on this distant fleet, these vessels that have crossed oceans and weathered storms, now lying at anchor in the quiet of the morning, their crews asleep or eating breakfast or mending sails, the bustle of departure and arrival still hours away. The river holds them gently, as it holds everything, and the slow rhythm of the tide rocks them with a patience that has no end. From your high seat between the chimneys, your gaze drops from the distant river and the great dome to the streets that lie directly below, but you find that the streets are not there to be seen. In their place, a thick blanket of smoke and fog fills the lower levels of the city, a dense yellowish-grey mass that hides the cobblestones and the doorways and the shop fronts from view, leaving only the upper stories and the rooftops visible above its surface. This layer is not uniform but has its own topography, a landscape of soft valleys and rounded peaks that shifts and reforms with every breath of the light breeze, a slow, quiet motion that never quite settles. The color of the haze is complex and hard to name. In the shadows, it is a deep brownish-gray, the color of old wool that has been worn for many winters, while where the first sunlight strikes it, it turns a pale, dirty gold, almost the color of mustard mixed with water. The smoke and the fog are not separate things but have blended together over the course of the night. The natural mist rising from the river, meeting the coal smoke from thousands of chimneys, and fusing into a single heavy atmosphere that hugs the ground like a second roof. You watch the way the haze moves, a motion so slow that it is more like the drifting of sediment in still water than the movement of air. In some places, the surface of the blanket is almost flat and featureless, stretching from one row of buildings to the next without a ripple, while in others it heaves upward in a slow, rounded swell, as if a great breath were being exhaled from a cellar door or an alleyway. The swells rise and then subside, not with any sense of urgency, but in a long, lazy rhythm that repeats over many minutes. Where the smoke meets the walls of the houses, it curls upward in thin, feathery tendrils, the way water curls around a stone in a stream, and these tendrils reach up toward the rooftops before thinning out and vanishing into the clearer air above. You follow one such tendril with your eyes, watching it spiral gently upward, growing paler and more diffuse until it is no longer distinguishable from the air around it. At the base of the buildings, the haze is thickest, a solid-looking bank that seems almost substantial enough to walk upon, and it fills the narrow alleys and courtyards completely, obscuring whatever might be happening there, whatever doors might be opening, whatever early figures might be making their way through the dimness. The effect of this layer is to transform the familiar city into something strange and dreamlike, a place of floating islands and mysterious depths. The rooftops that you saw so clearly earlier now appear to be disconnected from the ground, the upper floors of the houses emerging from the haze like the tops of cliffs rising from a foggy sea. The chimney stacks and the dormer windows and the ridge tiles all seem to belong to a city that has been lifted into the sky, a place where the streets are made of vapor and the foundations are nothing but air. You can see the tops of the taller buildings clearly, their brickwork defined and their windows reflecting the pale sky. But their lower portions dissolve into the grey-gold murk, and you cannot tell where the walls end and the ground begins. This separation between the visible and the hidden gives the city a quiet, suspended quality, as if the whole of London is holding its breath and waiting for the fog to lift. It is a familiar sight to you, this morning blanket, and it carries a certain comfort in its predictability. The smoke and the fog will always be there, filling the streets at dawn, softening the harsh edges of the waking world. The chimneys themselves are the source of much of the smoke that fills the streets, and you can see the fresh columns rising from the pots all around you, some thick and black, others thin and pale, each one adding its contribution to the general haze. The smoke that rises from the chimneys does not simply disappear into the sky. Much of it, especially from the lower chimneys, seems to sink back down, cooled by the morning air, and it spreads outward at the level of the eaves before settling gently into the streets below. The taller chimneys send their smoke higher, and these columns catch the sunlight and turn a warm golden brown, drifting away to the east on the light breeze. At the boundary between the rising columns and the settling blanket, there is a zone of turbulence, a place where the smoke twists and folds back on itself in slow curling waves, and this zone is constantly changing, never the same from one moment to the next. You watch a particular column rise from a chimney to your left, its base dark and dense, its upper reaches pale and feathery, and you see how it bends slightly to the north as it encounters the breeze, how its shape is pulled into a long, thin ribbon that stretches across the rooftops before breaking apart into separate puffs that drift away independently. The fog that comes from the river is the other ingredient in this mixture, and you can see its influence in the cooler, whiter tone of the haze near the southern edge of the city. The river fog is older than the coal smoke, a natural presence that has filled the Thames Valley since long before the first house was built here, and it carries a clean, damp smell that cuts through the acrid coal fumes. Where the river fog meets the city smoke, the two do not blend instantly, but form a visible front, a line of demarcation where the white-grey of the natural mist presses against the yellow-brown of the coal smoke. And along this front, small eddies and whirls form, delicate patterns that shift and dissolve. The temperature of the air plays its part in these movements, the cooler fog sliding under the warmer smoke in some places, while in others, the smoke pushes through the fog in thin, dark fingers. You let your eyes trace these interactions without trying to understand them fully, simply observing the slow dance of the vapors as they negotiate their shared space. The streets that are closest to you, the ones directly below your rooftop, are filled with a particularly dense patch of haze, and you can just make out the faint, blurred glow of an oil lamp that someone has forgotten to extinguish. The lamp is nothing more than a diffuse orange smudge, its edges soft and undefined, and it seems to float in the greyness without any visible support, a tiny, lonely sun in a miniature firmament. Around it, the outlines of a few window frames emerge from the murk, their glass panes catching the lamp's glow in a series of faint, rectangular glints. The windows are dark behind the glass, the rooms within still in shadow, and the lamp continues to burn, its flame invisible, but its light persisting, a small point of warmth in the cold grey blanket. Further along the street, another lamp appears, even fainter, a mere suggestion of orange that flickers and wavers, and then it is gone, swallowed again by the shifting haze. You do not know who lit these lamps or why they are still burning, and you do not need to know. They are simply there, small, steady presences in the obscurity. As the sun climbs higher, the quality of the haze begins to change. The golden light that now pours over the rooftops penetrates the upper layers of the smoke, turning them from grey-brown to a warm yellowish tan, and the surface of the blanket becomes more luminous, as if a light were shining through a dusty window. The shadows that fall across the rooftops are sharp and clear, but when those same shadows reach the level of the haze, they become soft and indistinct, their edges fraying into the vapor. You notice how the shadow of a tall chimney stack, which falls across the slates with perfect definition, seems to vanish when it touches the smoke, swallowed up by the grey mass as if it had never been. The light that does make it through to the streets must be a strange filtered glow, a dim amber twilight that turns every doorway into a cave and every person into a ghost. You picture the streets below, the cobblestones rendered in shades of grey and brown, the shop signs barely legible, the few early walkers moving slowly with their heads down against the damp, their footsteps muffled by the thick air. But you do not see these things, you only imagine them, and the imagining is enough. The reality of the streets remains hidden, and there is a peace in that hiddenness, a sense that the world below is still wrapped in a protective layer of quiet. The haze is not entirely empty of movement. Here and there, a darker shape passes through it, a suggestion of a cart or a figure that appears as a silhouette for a moment and then fades. These glimpses are so brief and so ambiguous that you cannot be sure you have seen anything at all. They might be people, or they might be shadows cast by some unseen bird, or they might be nothing but the random shifting of the smoke itself. You do not strain to identify them. The uncertainty is part of the calm. The blanket does not demand to be understood. It simply is, and you simply watch it, letting the slow, hypnotic motion of the vapor fill your vision and empty your mind of any particular thought. The longer you watch, the more the distinctions between individual swirls and eddies dissolve, until the whole mass becomes a single, continuous field of grey gold that moves with a respiration all its own, a slow inhalation and exhalation that seems to match the rhythm of your breathing. The smoke and fog also muffle the sounds of the city, and you notice how the few noises that reach you are softened and altered, their sharp edges worn away by the dense air. The distant clop of a horse's hooves on cobbles comes to you as a dull, rhythmic thud, more felt than heard, and the creak of a cartwheel is a low, groaning note that seems to come from no particular direction. The cry of a street vendor, which would normally be sharp and carrying, is reduced to a vague, wordless call that hangs in the air for a moment before dissolving into the general quiet. Even the church bells, when they sound, are muted, their tones rounded and blurred, as if the bronze itself had been wrapped in wool. This muffling of sound adds to the sense of enclosure, the feeling that your rooftop is a separate world, insulated from the busyness below by the layer of vapor. The silence up here is not complete, but it is a soft silence, a silence that has room in it for small, distant sounds to drift through without disturbing the overall stillness. The color of the haze shifts again as the sun continues its climb, and now you can see patches where the smoke is thinning, the darker shapes of the buildings beginning to show through like rocks emerging from a receding tide. In one place, a section of a street reveals itself, a short stretch of cobbled roadway, a shop front with a striped awning still furled, a lamppost with its lantern dark. The scene is brief, a window into the lower world that opens and then closes as the smoke drifts back over it, and you feel no particular need to look more closely. The streets will still be there when the fog lifts. They will wait. For now, the layer of smoke remains, and it continues its slow, beautiful movement across the city, filling the spaces between the houses with its quiet grey presence. You let your eyelids grow heavy as you watch, the scene before you becoming a soft blur of gold and grey and brown, the edges of the visible world dissolving into the gentle, all-encompassing haze. The quiet that has held the city through the long hours of darkness begins, very slowly, to give way to the first scattered sounds of the morning. Though these sounds arrive as thin and isolated threads, each one separate from the others, each one wrapped in the muffling layers of distance and fog. From your perch high above the streets, the noise of the waking city does not rise as a clamor, but as a series of solitary signals that drift upward like the smoke from the chimneys, each sound finding its own path through the still air before fading back into the larger silence. The haze that fills the lower streets acts as a blanket that softens every sharp edge, rounding the hard clatter of hooves into a dull wooden thud, and stretching the brief creak of a cartwheel into a long, low note that hangs in the air for a moment after the wheel has passed. You sit with your back against the worn chimney bricks, your eyes half closed, and you let these sounds come to you without reaching for them, without trying to identify their sources or follow their movements. They are simply there, part of the slow, gentle stirring of the city below, and you receive them as you receive the cool air in your face or the faint pressure of the slates beneath your legs. The first sound that you become aware of, after the long stillness of the pre-dawn, is the distant clop of a horse making its way along a cobbled street somewhere to the north. The sound comes to you in irregular groups, a pattern of 4 beats followed by a pause, then another 4 beats, the rhythm varying as the horse slows or speeds up or navigates around some obstacle that you cannot see. Each hoof fall is softened by the height in the fog, stripped of its sharpness until it is nothing more than a low, hollow thump that seems to come from no particular direction, a sound that might be near or might be far, its location impossible to fix. The horse walks on, its steady progress marked by the slow, repetitive beat, and then, after a time, the clopping grows fainter, the intervals between the groups of hoof falls lengthening, until finally the sound recedes into the general quiet and is gone. You do not wonder where the horse was going or what it might be carrying. The sound was enough in itself, a brief marker of movement in a world that is still, mostly still, and now that it has passed, the silence that returns seems deeper and more complete than before. Not long after the horse has faded, another sound lifts from the streets, this one a low, groaning creak that rises and falls in a long, slow oscillation, the complaint of a heavy cartwheel turning on an ungreased axle. It is a sound that has a rhythm of its own, a regular, cyclical pattern that matches the rotation of the wheel, each revolution marked by a rise in pitch as the axle binds and a fall as it releases, a sort of mechanical respiration that goes on for many cycles without interruption. The cart moves very slowly, or perhaps it is simply far away, because the sound remains at the same low volume for a long while, neither growing louder nor fading, and you imagine the cart trundling along a street that runs parallel to your line of sight, its progress steady and unhurried. The creak is joined after a moment by the faint rattle of loose boards on the cart's bed and the occasional soft thud of a load shifting as the wheels bump over a raised cobble. These additional sounds are barely perceptible, little more than textures added to the main note of the axle, and they blend together into a single, composite sound that is rough and wooden and worn. Then, as gradually as it began, the cart's noise changes direction, the creak angling away from you, growing thinner and more distant until it slips below the threshold of your hearing, and the street below is quiet once more. The watchman's call arrives next, a fragment of a voice that floats up from the tangle of alleys near the market square, the words too blurred by distance for you to make sense of them, but the melody unmistakable, a tired sing-song that rises at the end of the phrase and then drops away, the voice of a man who has been walking the streets all night and who calls the hour more from habit than from any need to be heard. The call comes once, a single drawn-out phrase that hangs in the cold air, and then it is followed by a pause so long that you think it is over, before the watchman repeats the cry a little further on, his voice slightly fainter now, the words still indistinct, but the cadence the same. The sound of a watchman's call is as old as the city itself, a thread of human voice woven into the fabric of the night, and hearing it now, in the grey light of the early morning, you feel a quiet connection to all the other ears that have heard such calls over the centuries, all the other early risers and sleepless souls who have listened to the watchman make his rounds. The call comes a third time, very distant now, the voice barely a murmur, and then it does not come again. The watchman has turned a corner or finished his shift, and the streets below are once again given over to the anonymous sounds of the waking city. In the intervals between these larger sounds, you begin to notice the smaller, softer noises that are always present but rarely noticed, the subtle soundtrack of a city that is never truly silent. There is the very faint, almost imagined rustle of a bird stirring in the ivy on a nearby wall, the dry scrape of its claws on the brick, and the soft flutter of its wings as it resettles itself. There is the distant, rhythmic creak of a wooden sign swinging in the light breeze, a sound that comes and goes as the wind shifts, each creak a slightly different pitch from the last, and the sign moves on its iron bracket with a slow, pendular motion that you can almost see in your mind. There is the low, continuous hum of the river, a sound that is more a vibration in the air than an actual noise, a deep, steady presence that underlies everything else and that you only hear when you stop listening for specific sounds and let the whole ambient wash fill your ears. These small sounds are like the threads that hold the fabric of the silence together, and they run beneath the louder, more distinct noises, giving the quiet a texture and a depth that you can feel more than you can describe. A dog barks somewhere to the east, a single sharp note that cuts through the muffled air and then stops abruptly, as if the dog itself were surprised by the sound. The bark echoes faintly off the brick walls of the surrounding houses, a series of diminishing repetitions that bounce from facade to facade before they are absorbed by the fog. For a long moment after the bark, there is a heightened stillness, as if the whole city were listening, waiting to see if the dog would bark again. But it does not, and the silence returns, undisturbed. A little later, a second dog answers from somewhere across the river, its bark fainter and higher in pitch, a distant, plaintive note that carries across the water and the rooftops, and the two barks seem to hang in the air together for a moment. A brief, wordless conversation between animals that cannot see each other, and then both are silent, the dialogue complete. A shutter opens nearby, the sound a dry wooden rattle that is followed by the soft thud of the frame hitting the brickwork, and you turn your head slightly to see a window on the second floor of the house opposite, its glass now uncovered and its interior still dark. The person who opened the shutter does not appear at the window, and after a moment, the faint glow of a candle or a lamp springs up inside. A small, warm point of light that flickers behind the glass and then steadies as the flame catches. The opening of the shutter is a sound that you have heard countless times, a sound that marks the true beginning of the day for many households, and it is followed by other similar sounds from further down the street, another rattle, another thud, another window coming alive. These sounds are scattered and irregular, separated by long pauses, and they do not build into any kind of rhythm. They are simply the small, private noises of people beginning their mornings, each one at its own pace, in its own time. The church bells, when they finally sound, do so with a single, low toll from somewhere to the south, a deep bronze note that rolls across the rooftops and vibrates in the air for a long, resonant moment before it decays. The bell is calling the faithful to an early service, or perhaps it is simply marking the hour, and its voice is so rich and so deep that you can feel it in your chest, a gentle pressure that comes and goes with the sound. Other bells join in, one at a time, each from a different direction and a different distance, their tones overlapping in a complex shifting harmony that is never quite the same from one peal to the next. Some bells are high and bright, their notes quick and silver, while others are low and solemn, their tones slow and majestic, and the whole city seems to ring with their combined voices for a few minutes before they fall silent, one by one, leaving only the memory of their sound hanging in the cool air. The street vendors begin their morning rounds soon after, their cries rising from the streets in fragments of melody that are too distant for you to distinguish. You catch a word here and there, a drawn-out vowel that might be milk, or a clipped consonant that might be pies, but the full phrases are lost to the distance and the muffling fog, and the cries blend together into a sort of soft, human music that floats below the level of language. One voice is particularly carrying, a high nasal tenor that cuts through the haze with a clear, repeated phrase, and you listen to it as it moves through the streets, growing louder and then softer as the vendor walks his route. The cry is old, a call that has been sung in these streets for generations, and it carries with it a sense of continuity, a link to all the mornings that have come before this one. The sounds never rise to a clamour, they remain sporadic and isolated, each one a solitary signal that the city is slowly stirring, and between each sound, the quiet rushes back in, filling the spaces like water filling a pool. The clop of another horse, the distant shout of a bargee on the river, the creak of a door opening in the house below you, the faint metallic scrape of a poker stirring the coals in a grate. All these sounds come and go in their own time, each one a small distinct event that does not demand your attention, but gently offers it. You let them come, and you let them go. Your breathing slow and even, your body heavy against the chimney bricks. The city below is waking, but you remain in the quiet, above, a silent observer wrapped in the cool morning air, listening without effort to the muted music of the dawn. Your body has been still for so long now that the boundary between yourself and the roof has begun to soften, and you become aware, very slowly and without any sense of urgency, of the many small ways in which the soot of the city has marked you. This awareness does not arrive as a sudden thought, but as a gradual settling of attention, a quiet turning inward from the wide views of the skyline to the more immediate landscape of your own hands and clothing and skin. The soot is everywhere, a fine black grit that has worked its way into every fibre and every crease, and you notice it now as if for the first time, though it has been with you for as long as you can remember. The woolen cap that covers your head, pulled down over your ears against the morning chill, is stiff with the accumulated dust of countless chimneys, its original colour long since lost under a coating of dark grey that feels dry and faintly oily when you reach up to touch it. The wool is coarse under your fingers, the fibres matted together in some places and worn thin in others, and when you press down on the fabric, a tiny puff of black powder rises from the weave and disperses into the air, so fine that it is hardly visible. You rub a small fold of the cap between your thumb and forefinger, feeling the gritty texture of the trapped soot, the way it fills the spaces between the strands of wool and gives the material a weight that it would not otherwise have. The soot in the cap is old, some of it from chimneys you climbed yesterday and some from the day before, layered and compacted by the pressure of wear until it has become almost part of the fabric itself, a permanent stain that no amount of washing could ever remove. Your jacket, which hangs loose on your shoulders and is torn at the hem where a nail once caught it, carries a similar burden of grime. The jacket is made of a heavy, dark material that was perhaps once a shade of brown or grey, but is now uniformly blackened, the surface covered with a crust of soot that cracks along the seams and the creases whenever you move. The tear at the hem has frayed into a fringe of loose threads, and each thread is coated individually, the black dust adhering to every twist of the yarn so that the threads look like tiny, dark brushes. You let your hand rest on the sleeve of the jacket, feeling the roughness of the fabric under your palm, the way the soot has given it a texture like very fine sandpaper. Where the jacket folds at the elbow, the soot has collected in the creases and thick dark lines, as if someone had drawn on the fabric with a stick of charcoal, and when you straighten your arm slightly, those lines crack and flake, the tiny particles shifting and resettling into new patterns. The collar of the jacket, which rubs against your neck, is worn smooth by friction, the soot there polished to a dull sheen, and the fabric has become thin and shiny, almost like leather, from the constant contact with your skin and the oil of your body. The soot does not stop at your clothing, it has found its way onto your skin, settling into every crease and every fold, and you look down at your hands where they rest on your knees, seeing them as if for the first time. The backs of your hands are a map of fine, dark lines, the soot having filled the tiny wrinkles and the pores, outlining every knuckle and every tendon in a delicate tracery of black. The skin itself is pale beneath the grime, but only just, a muted, greyish tone that speaks of long hours spent in the dark flues where the soot is thickest and the light never reaches. Your fingernails are rimmed with black, the dirt having lodged itself deep under the nail beds and along the cuticles, and no amount of scrubbing will ever get them entirely clean. The soot has become a permanent border, a dark frame around each nail. When you turn your hands over, the palms are slightly cleaner, the skin there thicker and more calloused, the lines of the palms themselves picked out in faint grey where the soot has settled into the deepest grooves. The calluses at the base of your fingers, where you grip the rough bricks of the chimney interiors, are hard and yellowish, and the soot has worked its way into the cracks of the calluses, creating a pattern of dark branching lines like tiny rivers seen from a great height. You rub the pad of your thumb across the calluses, feeling the familiar rough texture, the way the skin catches slightly on the hardened ridges. The creases of your knees, where your trousers have bunched up as you sit, are another place where the soot has gathered in concentration, and you can feel a slight grittiness there whenever you shift your weight, a sensation that is not uncomfortable but simply present, another detail of the body at rest. The fabric of your trousers is thin at the knees, worn nearly through by the constant kneeling and crawling that your work demands, and the soot has penetrated through the weave and stained the skin beneath, leaving dark circular patches that are tender from the friction. You do not look at these patches, you simply know they are there, just as you know the soot is on your face, a fine film that covers your cheeks and your forehead and the bridge of your nose, settling into the hollows under your eyes and the creases beside your mouth. The skin on your face feels dry and slightly tight, the way it always does after a long exposure to the coal dust. And when you lick your lips, you taste the familiar, faint bitterness of soot mixed with the salt of your own skin, a taste that you have known for so long that you no longer notice it unless you pause to pay attention, as you are doing now. The air itself carries a taste, a faint metallic tang that drifts up from the direction of the river, where the leadworks and the iron foundries have been burning their furnaces through the night. This taste is different from the acrid coal smoke. It is sharper and colder, a thin, coppery flavour that sits at the back of your tongue and makes the inside of your mouth feel dry. You breathe in slowly, letting the air pass over your tongue, and you can detect the separate layers of the city's atmosphere, the base note of damp from the river fog, the middle note of coal tar and soot, and the high, thin note of the metal fumes that rise from the chimneys of the workshops along the south of Bank. These tastes and smells are so familiar that they have become a part of your own identity, the signature of the place where you live and work, and smelling them now, in the quiet of the morning, you feel a sense of rootedness, a connection to the city that is built into your very senses. The metallic tang is not unpleasant, merely distinct, and you let it linger in your awareness without judgment, another thread in the fabric of the moment. All of these sensations, the grit on your cap and the soot in your creases and the taste of metal in the air, exist within a larger awareness of your body's own weight and stillness, a heaviness that has grown deeper as the minutes have passed. You feel the pull of the earth on your bones, the way the slates beneath you press up against your thighs and your seat, supporting you without any effort on your part. The muscles of your legs, which were taut earlier from the climb, have now gone slack, the fibers lengthening and softening as they rest. There is a deep, dull ache in the large muscles of your thighs and your calves. Not a pain, but a reminder of the work that came before, a memory of exertion that is slowly fading as the stillness continues. Your shoulders, which have been hunched up against the cold, have dropped down, the tension in the trapezius muscles releasing so gradually that you did not notice it happening. And now your shoulder blades rest gently against the warm bricks of the chimney stack. The warmth of the bricks seeps through your jacket and your shirt, a steady, diffused heat that relaxes the muscles of your upper back and sends a slow, pleasant sensation down your spine. Your neck is loose, your head balanced easily on top of your vertebrae, and when you let your chin drop slightly toward your chest, the stretch along the back of your neck is a comfortable, lengthening feeling that seems to travel all the way down to your lower back. Your arms are heavy, your hands resting on your knees as if they belonged there, the fingers slightly curled, the palms open. There is a faint, pleasant tingling in your fingertips, the result of the cold air and the returning circulation, and it comes and goes in slow waves that you can track if you pay attention. The weight of your own hands is a curious thing to notice, the way gravity pulls them down toward your knees, the way the bones of your wrists and the small joints of your fingers all settle into a position of rest. You could lift a hand if you wanted to, but you do not want to, and the absence of that desire is itself a kind of peace, a freedom from the impulse to move. Your breathing has become so slow and regular that it has faded from your conscious awareness, and now you notice it only as a gentle rise and fall of your chest, a rhythm that seems to happen on its own, without any direction from you. Each breath draws in the cool, sooty air and releases it slightly warmed. A soft exchange that has been going on since the moment you were born and will continue until the moment you die. A quiet, steady pulse that is the foundation of your being. The heaviness in your limbs is matched by a softening at the edges of your thoughts, a blurring of the sharp lines that usually define one idea from another. Your mind drifts without purpose, touching on a memory of yesterday's work, the feel of a narrow flue pressing against your shoulders, then moving on to the image of the river you saw earlier, the pewter surface and the slow barges, then settling on nothing in particular, a formless, wordless state that is not quite sleep but is no longer full wakefulness. Thoughts rise like bubbles in a still pond, expanding gently and then vanishing, leaving no trace. You do not try to hold on to them or push them away. You simply let them come and go, a quiet, internal weather that has no urgency. This drifting, this loosening of mental grip is as restful as the physical stillness, perhaps more so because it allows the accumulated fatigue of many days to begin to drain away, the way water drains slowly from a barrel through a small crack. The skin around your eyes feels heavy, and your eyelids have dropped to half-mast, the lashes casting a soft, blurred fringe across your vision. The view of the rooftops and the sky is still there, a wash of grey and gold and muted brown, but it is no longer something you look at with any active attention. It has become a backdrop, a gentle, unchanging presence that is simply there without requiring anything from you. You could close your eyes entirely, and perhaps you will in a moment, but for now the half-seen world is a comfortable compromise, a state of seeing without looking. The soot on your lashes, you notice, gives them a slightly heavier weight, and when you blink very slowly, the motion feels deliberate and calming, a soft sweep of darkness that crosses your vision and then retreats. Each blink is a tiny rest, a moment of nothingness that punctuates the long, continuous now. There is also a quietness inside your body, beneath the level of sensation, a stillness of the blood and the organs that you can almost feel. The slow thud of your heart is a distant, rhythmic pressure in your chest, so faint that you have to listen for it with your whole body, and when you find it, it is a comforting sound, a steady drum that has beaten through all the days and nights of your life. The pulse at your wrists and at your temples is similarly quiet, a subtle, regular throb that matches the rhythm of your breathing in a ratio you do not count. Your stomach is calm, not hungry yet, just a warm, settled presence in your middle. Even the small, automatic adjustments that your body makes, the slight shift of weight from one hip to the other, the twitch of a muscle in your calf, happen at a great distance, as if they belong to someone else, and you observe them with a detached, kindly interest. The metallic tang in the air persists, and you connect it now not only to the lead works, but to the general chemistry of the city. The burning of coal releasing sulfur, and the smelting of metals releasing their own vapors, all of it mingling high above the streets and slowly settling back down as the fine black dust that covers everything. You are breathing that dust, a little of it settling in your lungs with each inhalation, and yet there is no alarm in that thought, only a recognition of the way things are. The body is resilient, and the soot is a part of the world you live in, as natural to you as the pollen in the spring air or the salt in the sea breeze. You accept it without resistance, the same way you accept the weight of your own limbs and the soft, heavy quality of the morning light. Everything is as it should be, and you are simply here, a part of it all, resting on the roof between the chimneys, feeling the soot on your skin and the deep, quiet heaviness of a body at peace. The weather this morning has its own quiet presence, a character in the scene that makes itself known not through any dramatic gesture, but through 100 small touches that you notice one by one as you sit in your place between the chimneys. A slight dampness hangs in the air, not a mist any longer, but a general moistness that clings to every surface and cools the skin wherever it makes contact, a sensation that is gentle and pervasive, like being wrapped in a cloth that has been dipped in cold water and then wrung out. This dampness is the remnant of the river fog that filled the streets earlier, now thinned and lifted but still present at the level of the rooftops, a cool, humid breath that drifts in from the Thames and spreads itself over the slates and the bricks in the lead, flashing. You feel it on your face as a fine, almost invisible film of moisture, a dewing that collects on your eyelashes and on the fine hairs of your cheeks, too light to be called wet, but too persistent to be ignored. The damp has a smell as well, a clean, slightly earthy scent that rises from the wet brick and the moistened soot, different from the dry, acrid smell of the coal smoke, softer and more organic. You breathe it in slowly, and the cool air passes through your nostrils and down into your lungs, carrying with it a freshness that the city does not always possess, as if the damp has washed the air of some of its harsher qualities and left behind only the mildest traces of the morning. The cold is most noticeable at the extremities, the places where your body extends farthest from its warm center, and you become aware of it first at the tips of your ears, which have been exposed above the edge of your cap since you climbed up here. The chill there is a mild, persistent ache, a sensation that is not painful but simply present, a cool pressure that seems to tighten the skin and make the cartilage feel more prominent under your touch. You reach up and fold the edge of your cap down over one ear, and the wool, thin as it is, provides an immediate small comfort, a pocket of warmth that feels larger than it actually is because of the contrast with the cold that came before. The other ear remains uncovered for a while, and you feel the cool air tracing its outline, the way the breeze, such as it is, eddies around the curve of the ear and draws heat away into the surrounding dampness. The sensation is crisp and clean, almost refreshing, and you let it continue for a time before you adjust the cap with your other hand, pulling the wool down symmetrically so that both ears are now protected, the chill fading into a dull, distant awareness that gradually subsides into neutrality. The bridge of your nose is another place where the cold finds you, a narrow stripe of skin that faces directly into the air and that seems to conduct the chill straight into the bone beneath. When you wrinkle your nose slightly, the skin there feels tight and cool, as if it had been pressed against a cold window pane. The cold on the nose is a familiar sensation, one that accompanies every early morning spent out of doors during the colder months, and it has a way of sharpening your alertness without disturbing your calm, a small, bright point of sensation that keeps you anchored in the present. Your breath, when it leaves your nostrils, emerges as a faint cloud of vapor that hangs for just a moment before it is absorbed into the damp air, and you watch the small puffs appear and disappear, each one a tiny, fleeting ghost that marks the rhythm of your breathing. The vapor clouds are thin and wispy, not the thick plumes of a winter day, but the faintest suggestion of exhaled warmth, and they are visible only because the air around you is cool enough to condense them. You let your breath out slowly, deliberately, and the cloud that forms is larger and more distinct, a small, soft bloom of moisture that drifts upward and then vanishes. And the act of watching it is so simple and so calming that you do it again and again, each exhalation a tiny meditation. The slates beneath your hands carry the cold in a different way, their surfaces chilled by the long night and still holding that coolness even as the sun begins to warm the air above. When you press your palms flat against the slates, the cold transfers into your skin quickly, a sharp, clean sensation that travels up through your wrists and into your forearms, and you feel the texture of the slate at the same time, the fine grain of the stone and the slight unevenness where the soot has built up in tiny ridges. The cold of the slates is not the deep penetrating cold of frozen stone, but a surface chill, a thin layer of coolness that sits on top of a deeper, more neutral temperature, and after your palms have been in contact with it for a while, the slates begin to warm slightly, taking on your body's heat and giving back a coolness that is less intense than before. You lift one hand and look at the palm where the soot has been pressed into a darker pattern by the moisture, a map of tiny lines and walls that mirrors the texture of the slate itself, and then you place the hand back down, settling it into a slightly different position, feeling the cold anew as your skin touches a fresh patch of stone. The breeze, when it comes, is so light that you might not notice it at all if you were not paying such close attention to the air around you. It stirs only occasionally, and without any pattern, a gentle movement of the atmosphere that is more like a shift in the pressure of the air than an actual wind. When it passes, you feel it as a slight increase in the coolness on your cheeks, a brief, subtle freshening that comes and goes in a moment. The breeze is just strong enough to lift a loose flake of soot from the ridge of the roof and carry it a few inches before letting it fall back onto the slates, a tiny dark particle that tumbles and skitters and then lies still. You watch this happen several times, the breeze stirring a small puff of soot into the air and then dying away, leaving the particles to settle back into place. The soot flakes are light and fragile, and when they land, they break apart into smaller fragments that scatter across the slates, a miniature landscape of shifting dust that rearranges itself with each puff of air. The smell of the river mud is carried to you on these faint currents, a smell that is rich and dark and slightly sour, the scent of the Thames at low tide, when the water retreats and exposes the broad flats of silt and clay that line the banks. It is a smell that speaks of the deep, slow processes of the river, the rotting of vegetation and the stirring of ancient sediments, and it mixes with the cleaner smell of the damp brick and the sharper smell of the coal smoke to create a blend that is uniquely London, a signature as distinctive as any written name. The mud smell is not unpleasant, merely complex, and it grounds the other scents in something earthy and old, a reminder that the city is built on a river that has been flowing for ages, carrying the soil of the countryside down to the sea. You let the smell settle in your awareness, noting how it changes slightly with each breath, sometimes stronger and sometimes fainter, depending on the movement of the air. The dampness has a visual effect as well, a subtle sheen that coats the slates and the bricks and makes them gleam dully where the light strikes them. The rooftops that were dry and matte earlier now have a slight luster, a pearly grey shimmer that shifts as the sun climbs higher and the angle of illumination changes. The dewdrops that had settled on the slates are mostly gone now, evaporated by the strengthening light, but a few remain in the hollows and the cracks, tiny beads of water that catch the sun and glitter for a moment before they too disappear. The lead valleys, which were dry and pale earlier, now show patches of darker grey where the moisture has lingered, and these patches form irregular shapes that you trace with your eyes, following their meandering outlines across the silver-grey metal. The moss that grows in the gutters and on the shady side of the chimney stacks has plumped up with the dampness, its tiny leaves swelling and turning a brighter, more vivid green, and when the breeze stirs, the moss ripples very slightly, a soft, velvety movement that is barely visible. The chill on your skin is a constant but gentle companion, never intensifying beyond a mild discomfort and often receding into the background of your awareness when your attention moves elsewhere. You feel it on the exposed skin of your wrists, where the cuffs of your jacket have ridden up slightly, a cool band that circles each arm like a bracelet made of air. You feel it on the nape of your neck, where the collar of your jacket does not quite meet the edge of your cap, a small, vulnerable patch of skin that the breeze finds and cools whenever it stirs. These sensations are not alarming, or even particularly noticeable, unless you choose to focus on them. They are simply part of the fabric of the morning, threads of coolness woven into the larger tapestry of rest and stillness. The cold is not deep enough to make you shiver, though occasionally a small tremor passes through your shoulders, a brief, involuntary tightening of the muscles that releases almost immediately, leaving behind a sensation of warmth as the blood rushes back to the surface. The sun, which has now fully cleared the rooftops to the east, provides a counterpoint to the chill, its rays carrying a faint, distant warmth that you can feel on your face and hands whenever you turn toward it. The warmth is not strong enough to drive away the cold entirely, but it takes the edge off, softening the sharpness of the morning air into something gentler and more comfortable. The light falls on your closed eyelids as a soft orange glow, a pleasant pressure of brightness that warms the thin skin there and creates a feeling of being held in a gentle, luminous embrace. When you turn your face toward the sun, the chill on your nose and cheeks recedes slightly, replaced by a faint, spreading warmth that feels like a promise of the day to come. a reminder that the cold is temporary and that the sun will continue its slow climb until the whole city is bathed in its light. The sounds of the city, which you noticed earlier as isolated events, now seem to blend together into a continuous low murmur that rises and falls with the breeze. And this murmur adds to the sense of the weather as a living presence, a medium through which the life of the city flows. The creak of the sign, the distant cry of a vendor, the faint rumble of wheels on cobbles, all of these sounds come to you through the cool, damp air, and they are colored by it, softened and rounded and made gentle. The weather wraps around every sound and every sensation, a unifying presence that ties the whole morning together, and you sit within it, feeling the cold on your skin and the damp in your breath, content to be a part of this quiet, elemental world. The long, unmoving gaze that you have been casting across the rooftops and the sky has become, without your noticing the exact moment of change, something more than simple watching. Your eyes, half closed and soft in their focus, have been resting on the same broad view for so long that the scene before you has begun to lose its sharpness, the edges of the chimney pots and the ridges of the slates blurring together into a gentle wash of color that no longer requires any effort to perceive. The golden gray of the morning has spread itself across the entire dome of the sky, the earlier bands of rose and lavender and pale blue having merged into a single, luminous tone that is neither warm nor cool, but something in between, a soft, muted brilliance that seems to hold the whole city in a bowl of quiet light. The sun, which you watched rise as a sliver of gold above the eastern rooftops, is now a full, round presence that hangs just above the line of the horizon, too bright to look at directly, but casting its warmth into every corner of the visible world. The light touches your face with the gentle, diffused heat that has finally begun to overcome the lingering chill of the night, and you feel the skin of your cheeks and your forehead warming slowly, the way a stone warms in the first hours of a spring day. This warmth is a quiet comfort, a sensation that seems to seep inward from the surface of your skin and spread through the muscles beneath, loosening whatever small tensions might still be held there. The city below, which was a patchwork of shadows and emerging colors when you first settled here, has now resolved itself into a clear, detailed landscape that stretches away in every direction, and yet you do not look at it with the same attention you brought to it before. The individual rooftops and chimneys and spires are all still there, the same tiles and slates and bricks that you traced one by one in the earlier hours. But now they have become a single, unified presence, a continuous field of warm earth tones and soft greys that does not call out for your examination. The dome of St. Paul's still rises above the clustered buildings, its stone now a pale, honey-coloured grey that catches the full light of the sun, and the golden cross on its lantern still glints with a steady, unwavering brightness. But you do not focus on these details as you did before. Instead, your gaze rests on the whole of the scene at once, a wide, unfocused attention that takes in everything and nothing. The kind of looking that happens when the mind has grown as still as the body and no longer needs to name or sort or understand what it sees. The River Thames is a distant ribbon of silver blue that winds through the southern quarter of the city, its surface shimmering with the light of the risen sun, and the boats that move upon it are tiny, slow-moving shapes that drift without any apparent purpose, as if they too have given themselves over to the quiet rhythm of the morning. The smoke that rises from the chimneys has taken on a rosy tint near the horizon, the sunlight catching the particles of soot and turning them into a soft pinkish haze that hangs low over the eastern districts, while higher up the smoke becomes a pale golden brown that fades gradually into the clear blue of the upper sky. The columns of smoke are thicker now, more numerous, as the fires below are stoked and fed, but they rise with the same slow, unbroken motion that you have been watching since the first wisps appeared in the darkness before dawn. There is a gentle beauty in this smoke, a quiet, ever-changing sculpture of vapor that never repeats itself and never comes to an end, and you let your eyes rest on it without the need to follow any single column or observe any particular pattern. The movement of the smoke is like the movement of your own thoughts, which have grown so slow and so faint that they barely register, rising and dissipating without leaving any trace, each one replaced by a moment of simple, wordless stillness before the next one appears. Your eyelids have grown heavy in a way that feels natural and welcome, a soft weight that pulls gently downward, and you allow them to drift further closed, the lashes casting a blurred, dark fringe across the pale gold of the morning light. The world seen through nearly closed eyes is a world of soft washes and gentle transitions, the hard lines of the rooftops dissolving into bands of muted color, the chimney pots becoming soft, vertical smudges of gray and brown, the sky a vast, luminous field of golden blue that seems to shimmer very slightly, as if the light itself were made of water. You do not fight this heaviness or try to hold your eyes open against it. Instead, you let them close by the smallest degree and then a little more, until the visual world has become nothing but a dim, amber glow that presses gently against your eyelids. The glow is warm and even, the sunlight filtered through the thin skin of your lids, and it creates a sensation of being wrapped in light, held in a cocoon of gentle, radiant warmth. The sounds of the city, which were distinct and separate earlier, have now melted together into a low, continuous murmur that rises and falls in slow waves, and this murmur is like a distant lullaby, a soft, unpatterned music that does not demand to be heard but simply exists, carrying you along on its back. The boundary between watching and dreaming has become very thin, a delicate membrane that you cross and recross without any clear sense of transition. One moment you are aware of the slates beneath you and the bricks at your back and the faint, distant cry of a gull over the river, and the next moment these sensations have slipped away, replaced by a drifting, imageless state that is not quite sleep, but is no longer full wakefulness. In this drifting state, the memories of the morning blend with older memories, the rooftops and the smoke and the river merging with other rooftops from other mornings, other chimneys, other quiet dawns that you have spent in other parts of the city, all of them flowing together into a single, timeless experience of rest. You do not know if your eyes are open or closed, and you do not need to know. The amber glow is still there, the warmth is still there, the distant murmur of the city is still there, and these are the only things that matter. Time has lost its meaning, the minutes and the hours stretching out or contracting without any regard for the clocks that tick in the church towers below, and you have settled into a space that is outside of time entirely, a place where the only measure is the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The deep and quiet stillness that has been building since you first climbed up here has now reached its fullness, a completeness of rest that leaves nothing wanting and nothing undone. Your body has become so heavy and so comfortable that the thought of moving seems not unpleasant, but simply unnecessary, a task for some other version of yourself in some other moment. The slates beneath your legs have taken on your warmth, the bricks at your back have given their stored heat to your spine, and the cool air around you has become a soft, neutral presence that neither chills nor warms but simply holds you in place. Your breathing is so slow now that each breath feels like a long, gentle wave that rises from somewhere deep inside you and falls back into stillness, and between the breaths there is a pause, a moment of perfect quiet that lasts for what seems like a very long while. This pause is the heart of the rest, the still center around which the whole morning has been arranged, and you settle into it as easily as a stone settles into the bed of a stream. The scene around you continues without you. The sun climbing higher in the sky and the shadows shortening on the rooftops, the smoke from the chimneys thickening and dispersing on the light breeze, the boats on the river making their slow way up and down the tide. But you are no longer an observer of these things, no longer separate from the unfolding of the morning. You have become part of the scene itself, a still figure on a rooftop between two chimneys, as much a part of the landscape as the slates and the soot and the pale, drifting clouds. The city has accepted your stillness, and you have accepted the city's quiet rhythm. And in this mutual acceptance, there is a peace that goes beyond words, a peace that is simply felt, simply known. The golden grey of the sky, the distant dome, the winding silver of the river, the soft, rosy haze of the smoke, all of these things exist now without your active attention, and yet they are all still there, held in a gentle, luminous suspension that does not need you to witness it. You have done your witnessing, and now you rest, the long, unmoving gaze having done its work. The amber glow behind your eyelids begins to dim, very slightly, as the sun moves away from the angle that was shining directly on your face, and this dimming is a signal that the morning is advancing, that the day is settling into its full, ordinary rhythm. But the signal is not an alarm. It is a quiet, gentle reminder that the world moves on, and you acknowledge it without any need to respond. You could open your eyes now and find the scene before you, different in its details, the shadows shorter, the smoke thicker, the river busier with boats, and these changes would be neither good nor bad, simply the continuing unfolding of the day. Or you could keep your eyes closed for a while longer, lingering in the soft amber darkness, letting the last traces of wakefulness slip away into a true and dreamless sleep. Both choices are equally open to you, and neither one is right or wrong, urgent or delayable. The freedom of this moment, the absence of any demand or expectation, is the greatest gift of the rooftop perch, and you let it hold you in its quiet embrace without any need to decide anything at all. For now, you simply remain as you are, settled on the slates with your back against the chimney bricks, your hands resting on your knees, your breathing slow and deep and even. The warmth of the sun and the coolness of the air and the weight of your own body are all in balance, a perfect equilibrium that asks for nothing and gives everything. The city spreads out below you and around you, vast and busy and full of life, but here, on this small patch of roof between the chimneys, there is only stillness, only rest, only the deep and quiet peace of the long, unmoving gaze. The edge of sleep is very close now, a soft, dark shore that laps gently at the edges of your awareness, and you let yourself drift toward it without resistance. The amber glow fading into a deeper, velvety darkness, the distant murmur of the city becoming a faint, rhythmic whisper, until there is nothing left but the slow, steady pulse of your own heart and the infinite, soothing quiet of the morning.